And today we're going to jump right in. It's really about how to design volunteer roles to support the long-term success of the organization. That's always like the center goal is how are we helping the organization, how are we helping the community in that work and mission impact. And we're going to share and go over and do a little demo of a simple free data visualization and kind of assessment tool for volunteer roles or even entire programs by the level of engagement, enthusiasm, and impact beyond the number of people and number of hours. We know that's always a baseline of a metric with an organization, but we want to dig deeper, as you were talking about, Court. No matter where you are in your career, this is going to be helpful to you. And most importantly, how to design or update the roles you have that can be sustainable and that succeed no matter who is in the role, but are elevated by the individuals in that role. And that's where a couple of real life stories are going to come into play here. And also, towards the end, after we have Q&A and discussion, really going to dive into some ideas to action, share some resources if you want to, again, dig deeper on your own time, because an hour webinar can only cover so much. So we want to get you thinking about these things. And I want to hear from the wisdom in the room in that discussion and Q&A. And also, as we go through this, you might think to yourself, oh, I'm already doing that really well. And that's going to help you fill out the tool and kind of understand how to deepen that assessment and processes to kind of jumpstart everything for you. And so what is an impactful and sustainable volunteer role? Let's get that definition clear from the get-go. It's impactful to the organization's mission, and it's impactful to the community. So sometimes there's a focus on this is just good for the agency, but maybe you haven't checked in on, well, what's the real mission impact with the people that we're working with and the communities that we're within, online or locally in person. So we want to make sure that that is the focus. It's meaningful to the volunteers in the role, whether they're sharing a role or different kinds of jobs and positions across the organization. And we want to keep this human-centered and data supported. You might hear data-driven as a buzzword in our sector. Quite a lot is data-driven, data-driven. That's important too. We're going to talk about that a little bit. But we want to make sure that this is the impact that we're measuring of volunteer activities in different roles, jobs, tasks, that is supported by data, and that's part of what the tool will help you with, but also your VMS, like Get Connected, can also be aligned with some of these assessments so you can keep track of that in a more automated way, and we'll talk about that a little later. But also we want to think about a sustainable volunteer role is one that is accessible and equitable to avoid churn and burnout. One of the biggest things that I hear about as a consultant and throughout my career is, that flake factor of like people join and they drop and they join and they drop. So this is helping to create a solution for that. You already heard about who I am. Thank you so much, Court, for that intro. And again, the number one thing I get asked is how can I recruit and retain and not have to retrain more volunteers. Raise your hand or sound off in the chat if that's one of your primary issues with your organization, is that kind of recruitment cycle, because again, we're here to help solve that. And I also see that I want to kind of set the expectation that we're looking at recruitment and volunteer engagement differently than how HR recruits. And sometimes volunteer services or your job might be within an HR department, depends on the kind of organization or agency that you're in. But if you think about it, there's really an inverse relationship. Human resources recruits by screening many, many, many people down to one person filling one role. And we're really kind of the opposite of that. We want to design a role that many different kinds of people can do, whatever that is, whether it's complex and it takes weeks or months of training, like a museum docent or a zoo docent, or someone doing search and rescue, or something doing complex client work, like on a crisis line, or if it's just a drop-in episodic that a corporate group or a community service club is coming into. We want to make sure that that role is accessible to as many different kinds of people as possible that have the necessary overlap of skills and experience that make them a good fit for that role. Again, whether it seems like it's a simple task or a major responsibility. So the most common challenges we get, and Annalise, sound off, how's the chat doing for that answer about recruitment retention?
Yes, many
Lots of
people seem to be sharing the same problem.
yeah,
Seems to be very
yeah.
common.
You're in the right place, everybody. Yeah, so the most common challenges that I see in kind of role design, and also this ties into recruitment and retention. Recruitment and retention is usually a symptom of something else in the process. Something else in the operations or the onboarding or the training is not meeting or setting people's expectations of what they need to do for the organization, what the organization can do for them. So it leads to kind of these common symptoms. And one way to look at it is the common challenges is one person's talent or knowledge is holding everything together. Somebody is the Jenga piece, and if you pull them out, the whole thing collapses. We also, very often, I see inaccurate or just not detailed enough role descriptions for the actual experience. And that can be a high churn where, again, people don't want to feel like they've had a bait and switch happen to them, where they signed up for one thing and it turns into a really different experience that was not disclosed. There's also, people fall into habits and that this is how it's always been done. How many of you have heard that or said that in your organization, or usually had that said to you as leader volunteers if you're trying to update something, a policy or a role description or some tasks or some duties or responsibilities associated with it. And so this assessment tool that we're going to talk through and demonstrate helps to understand, like, is this still a practical thing that has real mission impact and enthusiasm behind it? Is it still meaningful to the volunteers and the community members that benefit from it? Or is it just something we've always done and everyone's lost track of it and it's just kind of here now? And most importantly, and this is the stuff that you can use ideally your volunteer management software to tie into, is the role crucial to the organization's mission and strategic goals, or is it a nice to have? It doesn't mean you get rid of the nice to haves, but you want to understand how much resources, how much energy, how much time is going into certain roles, and they may not be adding value to the community or having that impact that you think they're having when you really take a look and analyze it. And the most important thing, I think, especially for drop-in or episodic volunteers, is we don't want to ever give busy work to people. We all recognize busy work. We all know that it's kind of, it's just there to kind of happen. And if we don't understand the meaning of the impact of the work we're doing, again, however simple or complex the task, that's going to be a point where people are like, well, I don't know why I'm here. I don't know that this makes a difference. This feels like it's wasting my time. I'm not going to come back. And you can't change or improve anything without a baseline measurement. So again, that's kind of the tool that we're going to share today, is you can get a baseline measurement if you haven't already done any kind of needs assessment or strategic planning recently. And we also want to understand that the word volunteer by itself is not a job description and it's not a task. So if your recruitment says volunteers needed, that's not enough information. And we're going to get into why that's not enough information to just throw a wide net and hope somebody shows up. We want to have these details, and we want to make sure people understand from their first point of contact with seeing a call to action or a recruitment message, that they understand the meaning and the importance and what they're in for, setting and meeting their expectations for what that role really is. So your MVV, your most valuable volunteer, again, that Jenga piece. You don't want to pull on that and have it all fall apart. But what happens if that person resigns tomorrow? Something changes in their life, heaven forbid something happens to them. So kind of the solution to that is to cross-train people when they're interested in it, have other roles, even staff members to understand volunteer roles, shadow, have a buddy or a mentor, and have maybe a phone tree or a backup system where it's a deep enough bench, to use a sports metaphor, sports ball here. It's a deep enough bench that if somebody who previously had been the one Jenga piece, give them the opportunity to train others how to do that and be a leader and share their information. That usually helps people feel empowered and valued, that they're trusted to pass on their knowledge. And this can happen with staff as well. We're talking about volunteers today, but be careful of that person who's the MVV or the MVP, and that they're not the one Jenga piece where it's all just in their brain. Nobody else knows how this works. Nobody else has the passwords or whatever. Nobody else knows the craft of what they're doing specifically, and make sure that that knowledge is shared. We also want to be careful that the reward that we give people is not exploitation or extra work without their permission or meaning. So offering people leadership roles is not, again, you don't want to make it too dependent on any one individual, but the different people who know how to do that role each elevate it with their own personality, skills, knowledge, presence, style that they do it with. And that is important to kind of keep that role sustainable so it doesn't pull the whole tower down if one person leaves. Okay. The problem with penguins. I worked for the San Francisco Zoo. I'm in San Francisco with Carl the Fog right now. I worked for them in 2008 and 2009. And when I first joined up, it's kind of, mid-career for me. I hadn't gotten my CVA yet. But I started to run the docent and volunteer program for the zoo, hundreds and hundreds of people. And I realized that the role of chick cuddler for penguins, penguin chick cuddler, had a lot of people interested in it, and very few of them stayed around. So I want to hear in the chat, when you hear penguin chick cuddler volunteer position, what do you think of that? Does that sound fun? Like it would be you're cuddling cute little fuzzy, rubbing their little tummies and have cute little fuzzy penguins? So I realized that the actual experience didn't match people's perception of the experience. How's the chat doing, Annalise?
Oh, people would be very excited to cuddle these, these
yeah.
little guys.
It gives you it gives you a burst of enthusiasm. Like, when will I ever have the chance to cuddle baby penguins? Of course I want to sign up to do that for 2 to 4 hours, some shifts 7 days a week. Of course I want to do that. And that's what was happening, is it just said, cuddle penguin chicks, these hours, 2 to 4 hour shifts, you could do a double, you could do 4 hours, and show up for orientation on this day. That's what had been in place when I got hired to run the docent and volunteer program for the SF Zoo. But the volunteer role description, really, that's, again, your first point of contact in recruitment. That's going to make or break engagement in recruitment. And in the penguin problem, people thought, cute penguin chicks. Well, what was going on? Why don't people want to stick around and cuddle cute baby penguins? Okay, everyone, pop quiz. What do penguins eat, even when they're babies? Fish. What comes out of baby penguins at all ends, all the time?
Everyone,
fish.
Yeah, getting it right, I think.
Yeah.
In the chat.
Yeah. So the reality of the penguin chick cuddler is that you're in a cold, damp cement room back of house, behind the scenes, behind the main enclosure. And the penguin chicks are crawling all over you, and they're sneezing and they're pooping, and sometimes they're doing other things, and they want your body heat, and so they cuddle with you, but you are covered with smelly, gooey stuff after that experience. And none of that was disclosed in the original just come and cuddle penguin chicks. They didn't give you any information about the experience. And so when people showed up for their first shift and got their clothes ruined and were shivering and didn't really have a very good time, they wouldn't come back. So that makes sense now of why they wouldn't come back. How's it popping off in the chat, Annalise?
Yeah.
Just everybody, I think people would still cuddle the chicks.
and some would. We didn't lose 100%, but we had we had about a 75% flake rate on that. So what I did, since budgets are tight, and also people didn't really understand why it was important to cuddle penguin chicks, other than that burst of enthusiasm is, I personally, selfishly would like to cuddle a cute baby animal. Like, that can't be the only motivation. The thing about penguins and why they need to be socialized as chicks is that if they don't get used to gentle human handling and contact and just humans being around and being able to climb on them, later in life, if they're not socialized at this age, they turn into stabby footballs. And so it's dangerous for the zookeepers and animal handlers and vets to handle them. It's more stressful for the bird, and it's more dangerous for the people unless they're socialized as chicks, that humans are fine. Humans can check on you and give you medicine and cuddle you, and you're not afraid of humans. But otherwise, they're stabby footballs when they grow up. So it's important to socialize them, but that wasn't getting communicated. Here's how I updated the placement, the recruitment messaging, and here's what I did for the comfort, convenience, and connection. I talk about my 3 C's once in a while of happy volunteers to make it better for people. We got some inexpensive restaurant rubber chef mats, so at least you're sitting on chef mats. We got some $2 ponchos for people to put over. That's what we did. We made like $100 or less investment just in those things in that area to make it more comfortable. And then we disclosed to people, said, hey, come help socialize penguin chicks. It's important to their health and well-being throughout their lives in the zoo to be socialized to humans. Great. There's the meaning of the role in that. Wear grubby clothes that you don't mind getting dirty, or we have ponchos for you. Minimum 2-hour shift. You can do up to 4 hours. Bring a book, bring something, headphones, something to listen to. It's cold in there, so maybe layer up. And, here's what we recommend you wear and do. And then we can give instruction when you're there that, don't grab at them, just let them walk on you and all that. And that change, just accurately describing the role, helped people self-select that, oh, I know what I'm in for. I still want to cuddle baby chicks, but just that one change in the role description within a couple of months got a much better retention rate, where we got a waiting list within 6 months later, because there's a certain time of year that the chicks are that age. So we started to get a waiting list for the next chick season, year after year, because people knew what they were getting into, and then they could be excited about it and not feel like they'd gotten that bait and switch. How's the chat doing?
Going well.
Good.
People are self-selecting already on that volunteer opportunity. Yes. And I've had the same experience because I've worked in outdoor farm education. And usually the winter, there's a big drop off. So definitely understand that. And then also somebody did ask, would you please restate the 3 C's again that you briefly mentioned at the beginning, because that seemed applicable to what you were just describing.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm going to circle back. Yeah, I'm going to circle back to that. My 3 C's are for happy volunteers, and this is its own webinar and workshop and way of life. You can put it on a Post-it note, but just if you think of the words comfort, convenience, and connection, again, even if those 3 words, comfort, convenience, and connection, are on a little Post-it note, and you think about that, someone's comfort as a volunteer, both emotionally and physically, in the tasks that they're doing and the training that they're getting, what's the temperature, the tummy is another way to remember it, or whether they're eating, are we feeding them, are we not feeding them? And then convenience has to do with time, technology, and transportation. So typically time also has to do with the financial barriers of someone participating. And then connection is that sense of trust, and we're in this together. And being clear with a volunteer role and description, and centering the 3 C's, not just for volunteer role descriptions, but in volunteer engagement in general, that's what keeps it human-centered. That's what keeps it human-centered. And then we can use this tool and others to get the data behind volunteer activities and mission impact and connect those up. So the 3 C's is a whole other thing that I do, and I weave it into everything that I talk about because it's kind of my foundational system: comfort, convenience, and connection. Great question there. And this is how it's always been done. Change management is its own career for a reason, and most people don't like a sudden change. And so trying to kind of update volunteer roles or jobs, activities without explanation or buy-in automatically creates a lot of resistance to that change. So you want to work on, there's this old saying in business, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So you can strategically plan things, but if the culture of the organization or agency isn't aligned with those changes or haven't been set up to, get people's feedback along the way, and they just get, oh, we're changing this all of a sudden, which, hey, happened in 2020 with, hey, we're pausing a bunch of volunteer programs and activities all of a sudden, and we're not telling you why other than there's a pandemic and we don't know what, that was poor communication that's still rippling through organizations today in broken trust. But when you communicate along the way of doing an update or change or an assessment or an evaluation, why and how volunteer roles or programs might be assessed, then you build early buy-in, you get feedback, good or bad, and that's information that's useful, and you set expectations that everyone involved understands. So that is human-centered and then data supported. So the tool we have today will help, show the data of what roles have impact and what roles have enthusiasm behind them. So another little zoo story of mission critical or nice to have. It's not bad to have nice to have. So at the San Francisco Zoo, one of our top volunteer awards for our volunteer appreciation party every year, and recognition, I think, for volunteers happens every day. Smiles are free, thank yous are free, but hey, the zoo like to have a big party and people like to coming to the big zoo party. So we had the Good Egg Award. We had a lot of ostrich eggs at the zoo. You can make a giant omelet that tastes funny, or you can blow out the eggs and make art projects. So the Good Egg Award was a fun art project that we gave to volunteers, a handful of volunteers each year. And technically, it wasn't mission critical, but it was something that we invited volunteers themselves if they had artistic background or talent or wanted to. And sometimes we had paid artists that donated their time. They got an in-kind tax donation. So there was very high enthusiasm. People were excited to get a decorated egg, or usually it was customized with their favorite animal and inscribed with their name. It didn't have necessarily a high mission impact. It didn't have anything directly to do with animal care, other than we had a lot of extra ostrich eggs all the time. But it was fantastic for morale and PR. So that's something that, it's not mission critical. It is nice to have, but it's so nice to have, and it's so beloved by the volunteer community that we're going to keep doing that. And it's not a huge drain on resources. It took maybe a couple hours a year for me to wrangle who wanted to be the artists, and then they turn in their projects and they're beautiful, and that's how we do that. And again, meaningful work or time-wasting work. You want people to understand the mission impact and the importance of the role and the work that they're doing with and for the community. Be respectful of volunteers' time and talent. Don't have them standing around waiting for something, especially an episodic or drop-in group like a corporate group. We know the difference between busy work and not busy work. And again, keep the 3 C's of happy volunteers in mind: comfort, convenience, and connection. And we want the community benefits of these sustainable roles. So again, it's not just the organization that's benefiting, but what is this really tying into the mission and the impact in the community? Happier volunteers, maybe with the 3 C's, automatically are people who stick around, and they're great ambassadors for the agency. The best advertising you can have for volunteer recruitment is a volunteer having a great experience and talking about it in the community. Word of mouth is still the top recruitment channel we can get. We want people to understand that there's a direct connection to the organization mission for a wider variety of people. Your volunteer talent pool should, as much as possible, reflect the community that you're working with. And if it doesn't, then, people trust people who speak their same language, who come from their same background. And so if you just have a couple of groups from the community represented, there's ways that you can expand that trust and that engagement. I've also had, especially in conservation, it can be a really great talent pipeline to staff and board positions. People would volunteer at the zoo as the youngest age they possibly could, which was 12, and they'd be lifers. staffers, and they would want a career of conservation, and that's how they would do it. And there was also people who just came for a summer camp as a junior zookeeper and had fun for 3 months and did something cool and learned some empathy and some social skills, and then they went on with their lives. So, don't underestimate the power of, board members or potential donors also being volunteers, no matter what age they're starting with. And that sustainability of that role really leads to legacy and the long-term success of the mission and the cause. So this can also help build a leadership pipeline within volunteers themselves, and maybe that goes over and spreads in a positive way to staff and board members participating who also understand what it's like to volunteer with the agency. There's some very real financial benefits of sustainable roles, and we've got links in our resources in a second to more deeper research that we mentioned here. But use your volunteer management software, any other kind of CRM, donor software that you've got to gather and report data on volunteer impact for funders. When it's been proven by this research of the Initiative for Strategic Volunteer Engagement, which is now with independent sector, it's also recently been proved in a wider variety with points of light research from NICE to necessary, value of volunteering, that when you can show the connection to the mission and a positive impact of volunteer activities, when you show that to funders and ask for, hey, let's get 5% of this funding is going to specifically go to volunteer services, earmark that and ask for it. If you don't ask, you don't get. Ask for it in the grant. And when you ask, funders are like, oh, great. Very few people specifically ask for volunteer engagement or volunteer services funding. So start to use this data that you're collecting about these roles, about the programs in general, to be data supported in your ask for funding. Volunteers, again, having a good experience are the best free advertising you could ever hope for. They're also advocates and supporters and donors and voters. So let's dive a little deeper into how sustainable roles are made better by the individual people. And then I'm going to share a little story, and we're going to have time to go over the tool and talk about stuff too. I think that sustainable roles are made better by volunteers when you remove barriers to access. Again, the widest variety of people have had financial barriers, time schedule barriers removed from participating. I understand that certain roles, and I've worked with agencies where this has been true, certain roles have to take place at a certain work site at a certain time in a certain way, especially like in healthcare or animal care, human services, conservation. We have to be outside. Some of the work's indoors, some of it's outdoors. But as much as possible, think about, well, what are special projects or more bite-size micro-volunteering, or what are some other ways, even outside of the usual roles, that people can be engaged as volunteers, and maybe when they have time, they move into something that's a regularly occurring. So equity is the role is fair and reasonable in the workload and the schedule. Again, one person isn't being exploited because they did a good job. Hard work will be rewarded with exploitation and will squeeze you harder. Like, we don't want to do that. That happens in our jobs too much. We don't want to do that. And that there's fairness and accountability, that conflicts or mistakes are resolved with a written code of conduct, and that all volunteers and staff understand that there's not a different set of rules for staff or volunteers, and that the agency culture hopefully does have a written code of conduct with the expectation of treating each other with compassion and respect, and we're all one team, whether we're part-time or full-time or paid or unpaid. And that we have that skill sharing. Again, we don't want to have that MVV be the Jenga piece that everything tumbles when it comes down. So have these long-term volunteers teach the teachers and put on workshops or make training videos, or have people shadow them and learn on the job if that's necessary, so that their knowledge is not lost. And write it down too. Maybe they're the one to write it down. Maybe there's another volunteer that writes it down for them. And most importantly, every time I've done a survey on volunteer satisfaction as a consultant with agencies, and also when I've worked full-time for agencies, the number one answer when I've asked, how do you want to feel recognized and valued as a volunteer, is people say, I want my ideas to be heard, and I want my feedback to be taken seriously. So people want to feel heard and valued. And one of the best ways you can do that is, if people want to go into a leadership role, and that everybody does, but you offer that personal and professional development opportunity that complement the role, like leading teams or projects, doing those training webinars, shadowing. And I've even had volunteers that are a very long time absolutely train new paid staff who get onboarded. They shadow a volunteer in a kitchen of Project Open Hand to learn how the kitchen works. So having that sense of leadership and rewarding those long-term volunteers if they want to with sharing that knowledge, I found really helps people be engaged and stick around. How's the chat doing, Annalise?
Got some great questions.
Yeah, what are some of the questions so far?
Do you want to answer that one, Court?
Well, we have one question. If volunteers have all sorts of professional backgrounds, as you mentioned earlier, are there any good examples where volunteers have been invited to mentor or buddy employees to bring boost to engagement, connection, and commitment?
Exactly. And thanks for that perfect segue, person who I didn't pay to write that question exactly, because that gets into the story of John Gurley, John G. I was with an agency here in Northern California called the Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority, special district, so government agency. We preserve land and we have parks and free activities and free educational docent tours for people. Everything we did was free. There was no fee to come into the parks. And John Gurley, pictured here, this is us about 10 years ago at a staff holiday luncheon. John got invited to the staff things. John was considered staff. He was a volunteer with the agency for almost 20 years. He had been around almost since the founding of the agency as a special district. And John is a retired engineer. In his retirement, he decided to get a master's degree in geology as well, and GIS, which is a data visualization mapping system. He trained himself on that in retirement. So he was a quiet guy. He moved slowly. He didn't talk much. He's more of an introvert. But John started working on a fire history map of Santa Clara County, where we were, and then expanded that to Northern California, then expanded that to all of California. And at first, people like, oh, great, John's doing a GIS project. He's doing the simple map. This will take a year, this 6 months or a year. He's been here. He's been a volunteer in the planning department for a long time. He has his own work desk. He's in the office 3 days a week. He did that project for 10 years. Nobody knew that he was going to do one digital fire map for 10 years when he started, but he chose to do that, and that's how long it took to do it. New staff often underestimated him, or they thought he was a staff person because he just quietly sat and he did his work and he did it well. And the GIS map that John created and copied was placed first in local libraries, and then CAL FIRE, our state fire service, got a hold of it, and the data is still used to this day, and it's been built off of knowing where to do controlled burns, where it's most likely that a fire will start because it hasn't been a major wildfire there for 100 years. That was the content of the map that he was creating, and that helped predict and can do wildfire control, which, as we know, is a huge problem on the West Coast, especially California. But what we realized was that as I came in, John had already been in that role for like 7 years. He took 3 more years to finish the map. We would have planning department staff learn GIS from John because he was the best at it. Whatever their education was, whatever age they were, John would help train staff. He was invited to staff events, and it wasn't seen as favoritism by other volunteers because he was his own special thing. Sometimes new volunteers or staff would come in and they'd like, who's that guy in the corner? That's John. And they would kind of underestimate him because he wasn't big and loud and flashy. But the work that he does is so important to fire science throughout the state that he's like the secret agent of people that started the data mapping before people knew what GIS was and how data analysis and data viz is a huge thing nowadays. He was doing it 20 years ago. When he finished that job, he moved on to mapping sudden oak death throughout the state, and he's still doing that. He's well into his 90s these days, and he's been working for the agency probably 25, almost 30 years at this point. But that's a great example of a volunteer who absolutely elevated the role. Lots of different people, college students, engineers, they could have come in and done that GIS map project in 6 months or a year, and it would have been fine. Or we could have switched people each year to continue it. But this is one individual who really went above and beyond and really taught other staff and volunteers with his time there. Hopefully that helps that question. How's the chat doing? We want to jump into the chart, into the tool, and make sure we have time. Go ahead.
We've got a bunch of interesting questions and comments regarding background checks and when those might be required, and at what point in the process of sharing the details about the volunteer role, like the more effective volunteer role descriptions, like you mentioned with the chick cuddling. At what point in that process do you bring up background checks? Because you don't necessarily want to put it out there in an off-putting way, but you also do want to make people aware. And where might that be included in this volunteer role assessment and volunteer role descriptions?
Yeah, it really depends on the role. And I've worked with agencies where the staff and the volunteers had to be background checked because we're working with kids and families and elders and different kinds of considered vulnerable populations. And I'm also an advocate that not every role has to be background checked, because that can be a barrier of itself. I say you disclose that in recruitment, because again, you want to give people, you don't want to waste anybody's time, and you don't want to waste your time with someone self-selecting. And here's how I describe a background check. Join the latest class of zoo docents at the San Francisco Zoo. Educate the public, 90 hours of free training over 12 weeks provided, Wednesday evenings and weekends, background check required. And then what I put in the background check, because there are specific laws state by state, and in California, we actually can't discriminate based on certain kinds of background checks. It's within the law in many cities in the state. I'd say background check required, but we don't care about your speeding tickets, or something kind of lighthearted about that, so that people don't get that fear of like, I've interacted with the system, or I came out of foster care and I don't like the system. Like, that can be a self-selecting barrier that isn't necessary. So not necessarily joking about it. They say background checks required because we're working with kids and families, but we don't care about your speeding tickets. And just, something like that helps people understand, what is serious and what eliminates them and what doesn't. Hopefully
really
that helps.
Contextualizes it.
Really, give a context and do it right out the gate. Do it right in the main listing of having those details so people know what they're getting into. Because it's also a hassle to go get, life scan fingerprinted. Like, that's some extra time out of their day. Even if the agency is paying for the background check, that's a little extra hassle or loop or barrier for someone to go through actually getting it completed. Like a TB test, if people are working with schools or, again, certain assisted living populations or elders like that. Hopefully that helps. Okay. Let's show you the tool spreadsheet that was developed. This was developed by my friend and colleague, Karina Vargas, in 2022. We updated it in 2024. And just to give you an idea of a blank version, and then I'm going to do a little demo with one that's filled in for healthcare, so that people understand the context in healthcare. But you can customize this. So if the people asking about, well, how do background checks come in? If everyone has to be background checked, that can be added into something you put into this and see, is that costing you people? Is that not costing you people at different times? But a better picture of a role or a whole program can be, you put in like, what's the volunteer position, what department or site location it's in, and this in court, you can, tell people as we get to the resources, like how they can align this with, get connected, and you can, maybe assign some fields and do some of this in the VMS, or you can do this as a downloadable Excel sheet. The link that I have for folks to download this is from anyone can download it with the link from my Google Drive, but download it as Excel, and that's where it's going to work best for you. So you have the volunteer position, and then standards alignment. What are the industry standards? Are you in healthcare? Are you in animal care? Are you in food service? Are you in human services? Are you in something that has industry regulations that you can align with as standards? And then go to strategic assessment and buy-in assessment, and you rate these each of these from 1 to 5, and that gives you a score of a strategic power and a buy-in power. So that helps you understand kind of an operational impact and the scope of metrics. We do start often with a base of like, here's the number of people and number of hours, and then we want to get that built up into other categories. So you can see this is where we're getting some operational impact scope metrics, where just the very foundational base metrics, total of hours, total volunteers, but then what happens after that? Well, how many resources were allotted in that score? What was the complexity score that was assigned when we thought about that? And then operationalize, and what's that financial impact score? Are we measuring something that funders are asking for? Are we measuring something that's required of volunteer activities or program impact by a grant maker or private funder? How is this tying into the funding streams of the organization? And again, in healthcare, that can be very specific, but that also can be specific depending on what kind of sector your mission is in. And just to give you an idea of, you can list options for area 1, options for area 2, options for area 3. This is where you edit the standard. So if you look at the tabs, let me get my mouse here. If you look at the tabs in the bottom, assessment, program evaluation chart, strategic impact chart, and then editing standards, we're on editing standards, and this is what you can customize and add into. This is what you don't touch or change, because this is the math in the fields that's doing the scoring calculation for you. So don't touch this stuff, but you can absolutely customize this. I know this seems like a lot, and you're like, oh, I'm just looking at pictures of spreadsheets. So that's why we're going to do a demonstration and then have some time for questions. So I'm going to switch sharing to the tool for a second. And Annalise or Court, you want to catch me up on the questions in the chat so far?
Yeah, we definitely had a question about this is building on the previous question about buddying, mentoring with volunteers and other staff. Rather than just operational support, what about buddying, supporting in leadership, communication, finance, marketing, using professional knowledge? Any examples of volunteers and employees doing executive education or even qualifications together? I've definitely seen this over the last few years increasing in popularity. I'm curious what you have to say about it.
Yes, and to all of that. And one thing that we did at the Open Space Authority that was really worked really, really well is we had our top staff, our directors, our executive directors, our board members, shadow maintenance, shadow volunteers, learn everything they could about the agency, shadow each other's jobs. So I had my executive director following me around at a weekend boothing event, and then going to introduce a new corporate group of land stewards the next day of the weekend to doing some trail, REI corporate group doing trail work. So, and just, doing 1 or 2 days a year and having somebody shadow was hugely helpful. And the board said it gave them great insight. Some of them had already been volunteers. None of them had been staff members because they were an elected board because they were a special district. But I think that is incredibly valuable for, especially if you have volunteers or interns who are at that agency or in that role to specifically get career or job experience. If there's anything else that can expand on that by shadowing staff and learning more about their role, huge fan of that. Okay, so this is what this tool looks like, and we're going to put the links to the tool to all of you to access and download as Excel. But here we have for a hospital, an American healthcare system is probably one of the most complicated and regulated entities on the planet. It's very complicated. But if we think about, okay, here's the volunteer position, angel flights, baby cuddler. Again, it's not a penguin, but babies, they excrete things, right? So it might be good, might be a little smelly. Call light responders, car seat donation, career exploration, careware program, but community garden. I'm going to focus on the community garden. And here's the site department. So the standards alignment for healthcare are There's HCAPS, which has to do with the funding, federal funding of a hospital and specific things. There's social determinants of health that also tie into funding. And then there's specific high performance areas that are specific to the healthcare industry. So whatever's specific to your industry, you put in the standards alignment. So community garden, environment, access to healthy options isn't really high performance to the specifics of patient care, but it's cool. We've used a 1 through 5 system to assess, like, okay, what do we think this aligns with our standards? How does it align with our mission? And the garden gets pretty high marks for standards alignment, mission alignment, needs alignment, but it only gets a 1 for interest level. So that tells us, you know what, not enough people are interested in it. Maybe they don't think it connects to the hospital mission that much, but it's got a lot of strategic power because it ties directly into some of our industry standards of maintaining public health. But it could do better on buy-in power for that. And then we've got our base metrics of total number of hours and total volunteers. So there's hundreds of hours in the community garden. There's 45 people doing it. It takes a medium amount of resources. It's not that complex to do. And again, it's kind of in the middle of a financial impact. But if we look at this is my favorite thing that the tool does, because this is just, it's a tab on a spreadsheet. It's done a simple data visualization for you. So here's our community garden. We've got 4 quadrants: high strategic power, high buy-in, low strategic power, high buy-in, low strategic power, low buy-in. But the community garden is pretty good. It's pretty good up here. If we look at something that it has, but the Books for Babies program, it's not very strategic and people aren't that interested in it. Is it something we still need to do? This can help you see really clearly, or show others in your team, or show leadership if they're excited about Excels versus a story about baby penguins. This is the kind of tool that can help make an impact. So we're looking at the program valuation chart of both the program, and you can also do a top level of this on programs themselves. And then if there's different roles within those programs, you can do the grid again and assess those specific roles. And then the strategic impact chart.
Dana,
well, go ahead.
I think folks are curious. Are you pointing at a screen that's filled in, or are you pointing at the blank chart right now?
You should be able to see my screen share of the filled in one.
Oh, we're only seeing the blank one right now. So I thought you were going to in live.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Do a new share.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm so sorry. Yeah, I thought that you could see what I could see. Can you see what I see?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was thinking that you were about to start typing, and then other folks were pointing it out. So
it does say share. So
there we go. There we go.
I'm so sorry, everybody.
I
was talking about these things. So I don't want to take too much more time because I want to have time for questions and resources, but this is how it looks filled in. Again, download these from the links. Do you want to pop those links into the chat? And we can also share those links in a follow-up email, or you can email me directly. So these are the numbers I was talking about. This is what the data visualization looks like with Community Garden up here. Can you see that?
Okay. It says value prioritization grid.
Exactly. And you can see that there's Community Garden and a little dot there that I'm circling.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. So I was circling down here talking about Books for Babies doesn't have very much strategic power, and it doesn't have it's a low priority. It doesn't have a lot of enthusiasm around it. So maybe Books for Babies gets reevaluated if it's taking a lot of resources. Then this chart, which I'm so sorry that I thought you all could see, this shows that, that Community Garden down here, you can see this chart, this graph, that's pretty strategic. It's good to keep around. We just got to figure out how to maybe change the messaging of the recruitment to get even more people involved, because it's actually a pretty important role to fill. And then this would be you can change your review, list of options for area 1, list of options for area 2, and this is the part that you don't want to change that does the math. And I want to make sure we have time for questions and stuff. So that's a little preview of the chart. Apologize, the screen sharing was not doing what I assumed it was doing. Thanks for chiming in and letting me know. And I'm going to go back to the slides themselves, and hopefully that works too. Da, 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 da. Are we back to slides?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So what you can do with this tool is assess volunteer roles for their impact sustainability with the spreadsheet tool and community feedback. You can create or update roles to align with the mission and strategic plan with how we talked about it. And then that gives you that data supported but still human centered, think of the 3 C's, comfort, convenience, connection, and record keeping. Absolutely, if you can, automate what you can. Don't necessarily use AI. Don't get these things with ChatGPT. Use your own brain from what's happening in your department, what's the closed data set of your VMS or donor software, and then share and show and tell all of this information about the impact in annual reports and casual conversations. Anytime you have a chance to talk about volunteer value and impact and what you're doing in volunteer services, or a specific cool anecdote like the John Gurley story, then you include that as well, because you're talking to a variety of different audiences internally and externally. They might be more analytic, they might be more anecdote, emotion-based in their storytelling, but this gives you some tools in the toolbox to talk to anybody you want to talk to. And I want to get into some more Q&A. So we've got a few minutes here.
Yeah, Dana, there's so many great questions about mentorship, cross-pollination of ideas between, or skill sets with volunteers and staff and leadership. Also a lot of questions surrounding the necessity, logistics, and finances behind background checks, which I thought was really interesting. And then, of course, role descriptions. And also roles in and of themselves when it comes to, is something too much or too little for a single role? We had one question come up that says, in my organization, we have wraparound services like housing, education, community health, and youth centers. Every winter, we do a warm donation where people either donate gently used coats, hats, scarves, or they have an option to donate brand new. My question is, it's a little too much to coordinate. Would you suggest that we could use volunteer leaders or ambassadors to help with coordination?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that as long as, John Gurley chose to do something for 10 years, 3 days a week, like 20-ish hours a week, 25 hours a week. Meet people where they are. If somebody has a lot of skill, has proven leadership, ask them before you assign it to them and say, hey, you're so good at this. You've been doing this a long time. Would you be okay being promoted to lead this project, be this liaison, coordinate this yourselves? And people can say yes or no, but more often than not, if someone's a really dedicated volunteer, they'll say, yeah, that's great. And just make sure that you, as a volunteer engagement professional, that you understand that you've done an honest assessment of how many more hours is this, what does this entail, and just have a really honest conversation with the person that you want to step into that leadership role. And also, again, it doesn't have to be one person doing everything. Can you talk to 3 or 4 people to do that? So we want to, again, have that inverse of HR with how many people can do this well, and how can we set them up for success, set and meet or exceed their expectations of the experience in the description, in the actual experience, in the support of resources and staff around them if they have questions. But anything that is mentoring, buddying, shadowing, giving, having conversation with people about, we'd love to elevate you to this leadership position without doubling their number of hours or something, or getting it almost feeling like a full-time role, or splitting those shifts between 4 or 5 different people, and they make a committee, a liaison committee to organize this. I'm a huge fan of delegating to volunteers who can be trusted. I think, Court, I'd have to look through the archives, but I've done very specific workshops on background checks. If you go to my YouTube channel, Priceless Advice, and you put in the word background check in a search. I have several Tuesday tips about it that people can dig into. We also want to share the links and resources to the Points of Light research, the independent sector research. So since I couldn't really keep an eye on chat, and you two have that, have you been able to share links to resources in the chat? Great. And if it's possible, maybe we can reshare those in a follow-up email, and for folks who are visiting this topic later on. But yeah, it could be a whole dedicated webinar about background checks, because that is its own topic, and an hour only goes so far on any topic. But I really appreciate the questions that we've had. Any others in the last couple minutes?
Yeah, it looks like some of the other questions have to do with, gifts for certain volunteer roles. Do you have like a scale of like a certain role gets a certain type of gift? How much is too much or too little for something like that? I guess it would depend on your organization and what would be significant there. Curious on your thoughts for that.
Yeah, some organizations don't allow gifts to volunteers. It can get a little legally iffy around that, and that it gets into compensation depending on the value of the gift. But I'm a big fan of funification of prizes and awards. Volunteer recognition is not only a party or a Good Egg Award or a certificate. Like, again, in conservation, we'd have Yeti of the Year for someone who would go trail patrol in any weather. Something that's lighthearted and fun, but still is enough recognition if it's at a party or online, or saying this is the volunteer of the month. But as far as gifts, sometimes there's reimbursement for like a gas card gift if someone's had to do a lot of driving in their own vehicle for the agency, or they're getting mileage reimbursement. That's a thing. But I'm more a fan of not necessarily giving people gifts, because that can start to feel uneven, but having, recognition awards where they're not going to the same people every year, because that's just like high school Mean Girls clique, and we don't want to do that. But having an award of recognition, or sometimes a raffle with a door prize we would do at parties, and raffle something that was, a little more valuable. That was kind of fun. But, I think recognition goes beyond tchotchkes and novelties and gifts.
Yeah. And then one last question. There's so many coming through, and I
that's great.
For everyone to head to Dana's website. We're going to send you so many resources and follow up.
I'm a real person. I'm not AI. Yeah. Send me your questions after this. I'm happy to answer them and follow up.
I can definitely vouch that Dana is real, 100%, and not AI. So one of the questions that's kind of coming up is, you mentioned how volunteer program and engagement data can be used to make an ask of funders, and with so many people looking for different types of funding in the current climate, and diversification of funding, how can volunteer engagement and volunteer role data support an ask from a funder?
That is in the Initiative for Strategic Volunteer Engagement and the Points of Light research. So that's why, again, I've done entire YouTube videos. Look up Points of Light, look up research, strategic volunteer engagement. I have specific videos on that. But what basically came out of that research is that very little corporate and foundation funding is specifically earmarked to volunteer services. It's less than 1% by foundations and corporations, is what Points of Light found. You can increase that number by specifically asking for it, and work with your grant writer, work with your director of development, and say, hey, I think we can tie in volunteer engagement, volunteer impact data to help us get more funding. And there are a handful of foundations that do specifically support volunteer engagement. The Lady Foundation, Fidelity does a lot of that. If you look at the sponsors of Points of Light, like UPS and certain other corporations and companies, you can find where people are friendly to it. But it never hurts to ask, and especially if you support it with impact data, because the initial Initiative for Strategic Volunteer Engagement in 2022-23, that research found that executive directors don't know to ask for it in grant asks, and funders, because they're never asked specifically to fund volunteer services or volunteer engagement, they don't think of it either, and they don't earmark it. So you have to get it into the conversation, show the impact with data, give somebody a report if you want to include it, and that's how you start to get that funding coming in.
Dana, I can't thank you enough. I know we're already 3 minutes past the hour, and I want to say if you feel like me, where you could talk to Dana all day long,
Yes.
please head to Dana's website, head to Dana's YouTube, and if you're able to, bring Dana to your organization to see, a specific talk that could support you. You can contact her via her website, and can't recommend working with her enough. I literally could talk to you all day, keep going on volunteer roles. I want to let folks know that we will follow up with you based on all these resources. We will let you know how to stay in contact with Dana and to follow Dana's work through her consulting business. And we will also share with you our library of resources specific to volunteer engagement professionals. We have coming up in October Aaron Spink of Spink Tank, and Aaron is going to talk to us about leading volunteer engagement, the strategic mindset from micro to macro. And so really want to see you next month as we'll be right back here in the Get Connected Innovative Approaches to Volunteer Leadership Engagement series. So thank you so much for being with us today. And yeah, if you have questions about how technology can help support your volunteer engagement, that's what we do each and every day. And my team is available on the phone and via email if you need support. We also offer complimentary volunteer technology audits if you want to know how to take care of certain things with volunteer technology, like background checks or like communication. That's what we're here for, and we hope to see y'all soon. Thank you, Dana.
Thanks so much for having me, Court. Thanks everybody for joining. And Erin is a wonder and a superstar. You should all tune in to Erin. She's been a longtime friend. Thanks. Have a great rest of the week.
All right. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone. And we'll see you real soon.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.